Hi, I'm Natalie, and I just did an interview with the HackCess Show. Do I have a pretty good mix that's not overflowing? And is it positive, like surrounding myself with people who make me happy? When content rules and when you put that first, I fully believe that people will come.
Hi, and welcome to the HackCess Show. It's the place where you can find life hacks on how to become the best version of yourself and achieve your goals. We show you how to walk the talk from successful people. And today we have Natalie here. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, good to see you guys. Thanks for having me on.
That's a pleasure. So do you want to give us a quick overview of what you do for the viewers?
Sure. So I'm kind of in my second career. I spent nearly 30 years as a TV journalist. I've worked in many markets in the United States as a TV photojournalist, reporter, producer, most recently a TV anchor in Denver, Colorado for a morning show. And again, I did that for nearly 30 years, 28 to be exact. I just think it's easier to round it up to 30. But I realized in the last year during the pandemic here in the US that I could do a lot of what I do professionally at home. And working a morning show, if you watch morning television, those people have really weird schedules. I was getting up in the middle of the night for nearly 18 years, and I have 3 kids. And as much as I loved having my work day done at 10 o'clock in the morning, it made the afternoons and the evenings very difficult. And I did that for so long that I realized I'm not doing myself any favors with my health and my age by getting up so early. And I can do a lot of these things at home when I was doing recordings like this for interviews. And I realized that I don't need to do television to be a journalist. So I threw caution into the wind and I said, I'm going to start my own business. I started a podcast this year. It's just taken off. It is so fun. I love it. And I have a YouTube channel. So I'm continuing doing what I've done professionally, but I'm doing it for myself and digitally.
So when you first started your second career, did you had this like burning desire inside yourself and you were like, all right, that's it. I'm going to stop what I'm doing right now and then go into my second career? Or did you start planning? How did the transition go?
That's a great question. And I think a lot of people have that thought of, I want to do something else. But first of all, I've worked very hard. And in my industry as a television journalist, I worked really hard to get to where I was, from small markets up to one of the largest markets in the United States. So it was hard to leave what I knew so well. And I think for a lot of people, it's hard to leave something that you're good at and that you've had success with. But I had that kind of ping in my stomach. You know what I'm talking about? Like something needs to change. Something's not right. It's where you really learn to listen to that inner voice. And I knew I needed to make a change. And I think I knew it for a few years. I signed an extension to one of my contracts at the TV station, and I knew that extension was a trial period for me. And so that entire time, it was almost like signing that contract was oh boy, here we go. And I knew that full time I needed to do it so that I could really be sure. But I spent a year thinking, what's going to be next? What's going to be next? And so I did a little, working at home. I was broadcasting from my home for several months, first in a little closet, then in my basement. And I was doing the full morning show when we were on lockdown from my home. And that was really, that was the light bulb moment for me. It was, I can do this at home and I can do it for myself. And thank goodness for technology. I can have interviews just like this and I can put them out there for the world and people will consume them. So what I've loved about it most is that I get to do longer interviews. When you're doing news, they're very short interviews. It's breaking news. It's fires and crime and politics, but I get to dig into things I love. But back to your question, sorry, I got off track there.
Yeah, that's fine.
How did I know the second career was what I wanted to do? Is I really had to look internally to decide that I was going to do it and that it might be messy in the beginning, but that's okay. And it's been better than I even thought it would be.
Wow. And you know, on this on our podcast, when we talk to people, it's usually there's usually this inspiring kind of positivity, and I see that in you as well. And you weren't afraid to just, take that step, start your second career. And can I ask you, how does that look in terms of setting goals? Because you set so many goals that you've probably reached in one career, and now starting from scratch, how does that, or what does that do to you mentally? Is it even more motivating, or on the contrary?
Well, I think you said I wasn't scared or something like that. I absolutely was. Absolutely. I mean, I had built this dream career. Everyone thinks, oh, you had this perfect job. You were on television. And, I have so many kids come to me and say, I want to be a TV anchor. And everyone said I had this dream job, and yet I wasn't happy. Mm. And so I think first you ask yourself that question, are you really happy? And I gave myself 3 things. I don't know where I came up with these, but early in my career, 3 things. Are you going to stay with this job? And the 3 things that I based it on was, am I proud of what I'm doing? Every day I wake up and say, I'm proud to do what I do. The second thing, am I happy? Am I just happy? Do I wake up and go, I'm really lucky to do this, and I'm happy, and I have a smile on my face, and I'm motivated? And then the third one was, am I challenged? Every day, is there a challenge that I'm presented with that I get to conquer? And I found that I was still challenged in a different way. I wasn't really challenged by delivering the news, but every day I was learning something new. I found that I wasn't proud and I wasn't happy. I'm not very proud of where the news industry landed. I think it's very difficult, and it's very difficult. I wasn't very proud every day of what I did. And I just wasn't happy. I wanted to do stories and interviews that changed people's lives, that helped them, that motivated them, that gave them inspiration. It might be health news, great topics to help people, relationships. And that's really what I focus on. My new podcast is family, health, mindset, relationships. And those are things, we are what we fill our minds with. And if I'm filling my mind with just hard news and breaking news and difficult things, especially during the political season here in America and with COVID, and it was like I became just depressed about that. Not clinically, but you are what you fill your mind with. So I always tell people, we need to know what's happening in the world, but you don't have to obsess with it, and you don't have to watch it nonstop. Fill your mind with things that motivate you. So that's what the podcast is all about. Each week that I'm doing is helping people, interviews that help them or change maybe the way they're thinking, enlighten them.
Mm-hmm. And so you said that you ask yourself like different questions, like, am I happy with what I'm doing and all that? So how did your setting your goals change compared to before, instead of saying, all right, I want to get this done and this done, when you start from scratch, do you have do you set goals on a different level? Maybe more like, I want to interview great people and I want to have a great podcast. And that's what we do with Leo. It's at first we're like, we want to reach this amount of viewers and this amount of listeners on the podcast.
Yes. Let me show you my notebook.
Yeah.
It's detailed. My goals. It's, that may be the hardest thing for me, is that I'm used to waking up every day and my goals are set for the day, at least in terms of television news. Mm-hmm. And it is, here's what you're going to do for the day. You go home, start again tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So being an entrepreneur and setting new goals that are big, I haven't had to do that. I mean, I had a career, but it was a daily goal instead of a long-term goal. So yes, I've learned to set new goals in the types of interviews I want to do. I think it's super important, like me, I color code it. It's super important to just have lists, for me anyway, and brainstorm and dream and to not be afraid to do that, to write everything down, as big as it may seem, to write it down, and then every day just tick away at it.
Oh, that sounds so cool. That's great. I mean, that's great advice. That's I think what our listeners tune in for, like those kind of tools, and that does help them. And staying on this theme of helping, you said before that you want to interview people or you want to have interviews on your YouTube channel, on your podcast that can help people. And now, how do you see, or how do you want to conduct your interviews to help people? Is it in a way like more informative, just interviewing people on the jobs that they do to inspire listeners or family members, or is it going to be more about how to be a good parent and concrete things like that?
Yeah. My goal is to interview people that help us think differently, to interview people that open our minds to concepts and ideas, to dig deeper into topics that people like me and you, that we think about and worry about, but we don't really get deep into them. So my first podcast was on burnout, and I experienced that. It's how do you know when you've reached a level that you might want to change directions, even though you've been in one career for many, many years? What is burnout? What can you do about it? And it was with a psychologist, and she is phenomenal. And what is burnout? What can I do about it? And when do I need to make that change? The second episode was on weight. So many people struggle with their weight, and it's really not about food. So I just did another podcast recording today with someone on a similar topic on emotional eating, how people eat because they're happy, they're scared, they're anxious, not because they need to nourish their body. And that is very common. And so digging deeper into those topics, and then asking for tips on those topics as well. One of my favorite episodes, because I struggled with it for so long, was on sleep and how we need 7 to 9 hours of sleep. I thought I was doing my whole family a favor by sleeping 4 or 5 hours and then going to work and then being a mom in the afternoon. I wasn't doing anybody any favors because I was emotional. I was tired. I wasn't effective at much because I wasn't getting that necessary sleep for my own health and well-being and mental state. So those types of topics where I ask the experts in those fields what to do about these issues. So we're educating and also getting tips for everyday life on these types of topics.
That's so cool. And I'm curious, like you talked about burnout and negative feelings and all that. And I'm curious on how, what is your vision of, consuming news and staying positive at the same time? I'm a very extreme person, and like for me, if I want to stay positive, I just don't watch the news. And I know that nowadays it's important to stay informed and all that. So what's the do you have a specific a key to balancing news and positivity?
Boy, that is a really hard one, because for again, nearly 30 years, I studied journalism in college. So my college life, then 28 years in the business, I consumed a lot of news. But I'll also tell you that I would dream about news. Again, what we fill our minds with is what we think about, what we dream about. And so some of the negative things that would happen in the news, I'll give you some terrifying examples. In America, we've had some just horrific events and shootings, some at schools, as you know. And those were things, particularly here in Colorado, we had the theater shooting, the Aurora Theater shooting. I started to put my family in my dreams into those scenarios. That was a wake-up call for me. That was a wake-up call. Like, I am thinking too much about this. But I did a 4.5-hour show. I was live on television every day for 4.5 hours. And then I would come home and need to keep up with it and study it and know the facts and know the names and look for interviews. And so that's what was in my head. And I think that was the wake-up call for me. That is, this isn't healthy for me or my family or for anyone that consumes too much of it. Now, I was able to separate myself while I was doing my job. And I think it's a very important role for journalists to play. But I knew that I didn't need to do that forever. And I tell people now, we do need to stay informed. And, 10 minutes a day of reading the headlines and maybe digging a little deeper, but it doesn't help us to know all the details of all of those stories. Instead, spend that time learning something that can help your family or improve your health or exercise, whatever those things are. So I'm a big believer in filling your mind with things that are positive.
Mm.
Yeah, no, I agree, because I have this idea that the things that you let in will affect your day, and on a much larger scale, well, the things that you fill your mind up will make who you are. And
Absolutely.
and you talked about, well, to me it's clear that journalism is such a big part of you, and I can relate to that because journalism is a big part of me too.
Mhm.
And I remember I actually was a radio show host for a while, and I had to do interviews and things, and I took so many of those bad habits home with me
Mhm.
at the end of the day, because I was doing an evening show. So I'd come home, sleep, wake up, and then start my day with the same energy that I worked with.
Mhm.
And do you have a ritual or something like that for because you just told us that you had all these scenarios and all this information in your head, but how did you come home and communicate and be a mom without constantly being in that energy of newscaster you? Do you know what I mean? How do you separate your
So funny. My kids will sometimes say, "Mom, you're talking in newscaster voice." I'm like, "What's newscaster voice? I don't even know what you're talking about." And they're like, "No, there's mom voice and there's newscaster voice."
Yeah.
I think this is mom voice. I don't know, but it's just funny that you say that. Um, a ritual, for me, exercise,
Mm.
a hot bath, like things that just get my head out of it, out of those scenarios. But I was never very good at it. Like, I think when you're a journalist and you love what you do, which I do and I did for a long time, you live and breathe it.
Mm.
And I don't know if that's healthy. But in the middle, you kind of have to consume it at all times to be good at it, because I would go in at 4 a.m. and I didn't have an hour to catch up on the details. We were on at 4:30. So we have a meeting at 3:40 in the morning, and then I would go put on makeup, and by 4:30 we were live on air. So I had to consume it all day to be well versed at 4:30 in the morning.
Mm.
So it was hard for me to shut off. But in the last couple of months, since I said goodbye to that and started this, I really don't consume much of anything other than on my phone if I'm scrolling through social media, or I'll get my headlines, but I don't consume that much. And I think it does need to be habits. And we know how important habits are, that we have habits, that we get up and we start our day on a positive note, and that we end our day on a positive note with things that we want to fill our minds with.
Mm. And being an entrepreneur and a mom too, like that's so much work, I guess, like and responsibilities. So how do you balance all that, and maybe sometimes sacrifice goals and like personal or professional goals to spend more time with the family or spend more time on the business? How do you like manage all this time?
It's like keeping all the balls in the air, right? Trying to juggle. And I was never good at juggling. I can do 2, but I have 3 kids and 3 dogs and I'm an entrepreneur. So I don't think there is such a thing as balance. It'll never be perfectly balanced. And I think we have to just admit that and say, it's okay if it's not balanced. It's okay if it's messy and awkward. That's life. I tell my kids, though, and I try to live by my own mantra of, we were made to do hard things. And that when things are hard, you're growing. And so if my kid, one of them might come, I have a 20-year-old, 16 and 11. And my 11-year-old the other day, he said, "This is just hard." School, I think. And I said, "Well, good, because you were made to do hard things." And then he'll go, like, "I knew you were going to say that," because that's what I always tell him. But I just think that when we're challenged, we're doing what we're supposed to do. So that's kind of the mantra I live by in staying positive and doing it when it's hard, and not feeling like it has to be perfectly balanced, because it's just not.
Yeah. And you mentioned something beautiful about feeling that challenge, feeling that you're going uphill, and that's kind of knowing that you're in the right direction, right? And how does it look like when you're running downhill? For example, now you've set up your podcast, and it's going to be, you said, I think 1 episode per week. And when that's just free flowing, and when you're doing that, when you're in the rhythm, how are you going to keep challenging yourself, even though it's almost automatic after a certain time?
Yeah. Great question, because I think doing the morning news became very automatic for me. The autopilot. We never want to be in autopilot. It's a dangerous place to be. We're not doing it. It's not hard if it's just autopilot. It doesn't mean that life has to be hard, but for me, I like the challenge. So I always find a way to continue going up a hill. Going down, sometimes you need that little relax, right? Like, okay, I've been challenged now for a week. I just kind of need a chill week.
Yeah.
But to continue to find ways to grow. So for me, the podcast was number one. Get the podcast started, get great interviews on, grow my audience, and then let's build the website. I've got a blog. I blog once a week, but doing that every day instead of once a week. The YouTube channel, growing that with more interviews, not just once a week on other topics. So I think there will always be a way to continue to grow and set new challenges, but I'm also trying to be realistic and say one thing at a time. The podcast was first, and then we'll just see what comes next.
Man, that's awesome too. Like, just not becoming complacent, and because I know it can be when you're working hard on something and then everything falls into place, and you can become just not lazy, but complacent, and you start doing the same automatic things. And I'm curious in terms of setting goals for your mindset and your health, because you talked about journalism that could be like having a negative impact. So how do you how did you improve this aspect of your life now?
My mindset. How did I improve my mindset? Well, it very much, as I said earlier, is choosing to, I don't have a plate near me, but I envision this plate and I look at everything on it, and sometimes it's like overflowing and I'm trying to like balance it like a waitress, right? A server. And I think, okay, it's gonna fall over and everything's gonna end up on the floor. So I got to take a couple of things off of there and like just make it manageable. And so I had to look at my plate and say, what's on it? Is it balanced? It's never going to be perfect, but do I have a pretty good mix that's not overflowing? And is it positive? Like surrounding myself with people who make me happy, that make me feel good, that fill me up. And then not feeling like you have to have an abundance of friends, but that you have people you can rely on that do fill you up. And same with my work goals, that all of those things make me happy, challenge me, and that I'm proud of. Those three things that I mentioned before.
Wow. Yeah, I had never pictured the plate, but it actually makes so much sense, because even if it's if it's too heavy or if it's overflowing, you won't be able to carry it. You won't be able to carry that load.
You're going to collapse. Yeah.
And when that does happen, because sometimes it's inevitable. Do you have a mentor or someone who you trust enough to build something with or through?
So important to have people that we feel have our best interests at heart and who give us that encouragement. So yes, my family, number one, a couple of very valuable friends that I know I can say anything, so that even my like real deep weaknesses, that I can say, hey, I'm feeling this right now. Like, I just think it's so important that we check in with those people regularly. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree, because I don't have one, but one day maybe I'll have one person, or at least, a group of people who I can look to.
You've got Matt, and now you've got me.
Thank you so much. And can I ask you about your podcast? Why did you want to focus on family, health, mindset? Was that the three pillars that you thought are essential to your life or to most people's lives?
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about the reason I chose those. They were just, and I think they are probably the pillars of my life that I have found we need the most. Also, in doing journalism for so many years, I was a health reporter early in my career for about 6 or 7 years, and I interviewed doctors and healthcare experts every day. And I saw the life-changing that was happening through stories. Someone who didn't know about a procedure, didn't know about a medication, or didn't, I love natural medicine. I love the idea of let's figure out what's wrong instead of just giving a drug to fix something. So I love the idea of digging deeper into that to help us all feel better. So I saw the value in health news. And then obviously family, because it's such a big part of my life with 3 kids, and the difficulties, the valleys that we are in sometimes as a parent that are just so hard, to help people with that. And relationships, marriage, like it's a job. Like you can't just assume that it's always going to be perfect. You have to work on it. And families, relationships, friendships, all of those things are important to me. And then mindset too. I mean, I think it really that has come into play for me through the pandemic. That is like, we have to think positive. We have to get through this. We have no choice. We have to figure out, and we fill our minds with the things we want to say and do and feel. So I've really learned to do more of that. And I think that's why I wanted to make it part of the podcast as well.
And I want to go back to envisioning the plate, because I think it's actually a great idea. Is that your way of enjoying the moment and being like, okay, I got this plate, that's everything going on in my life right now, and either I like it or not. And when you like it, it's a great way to say, well, I got this beautiful plate and I enjoy it, and that's like, I'm happy with my life right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's a great way to envision every day. And those days where your list is like so long, and then the phone rings, and then you get these emails and you're like, whoa, my plate is way too full right now. And you go, okay, priorities here. I'm just going to take a few things off. This is what it needs to look like today. Everything's going to be okay. And so I do kind of look at it daily. And just envision, like, and I try to, I think it helps. I'm visual. So I like having that visual. And with my kids too, I'm like, listen, you can only do so much, kids. You can't do everything. Stop expecting that of yourself. Take something off your plate. You can do it next year. You can do it. You can't do soccer and baseball and be in this club and do that. You won't be successful at any of them. So focus and let your plate be balanced. And then you can bring more in once it's really settled.
Wow, that's great. Thank you. Because I mean, that's even clearer. I told you that the idea of the plate really talked to me, and just hearing you explain it more made me want to actually use that for myself.
It didn't make you hungry? Because I'm kind of hungry thinking about the plate. It is lunchtime.
I was curious because you've built. I mean, your past career was built around numbers, viewers, and all that, and that was the business. And now that you're more focused on helping people and quality instead of quantity, how are you going to make it, or how are you going to focus on the quality instead of the quantity? Because that's something that we discuss, Matt and myself. That we want to produce more content, but it has to be qualitative. So how does that look for you?
I am just a big believer that good things will come when you do good work. And the content is everything. Content is everything. If you are doing great content every day, you're doing great interviews. For you guys, motivational people, I love what you're doing. That people will come because word of mouth, spreading that. Social media is a great thing. I see your stuff on social media. I share it because I like it. That content will always win. And it's almost when you just let that happen. And you have to promote it in some way. You got to talk about it. You have to put it out there for the world to see. But when content rules and when you put that first, I fully believe that people will come.
And do you have, before we do promo time, I want to ask, do you have maybe one advice that you want to give entrepreneurs? Maybe, like it's never too late when you build like a strong first career and you want to move to something else. Do you have one advice for these people?
Just listen to your gut. We say that, we hear that from people often, but do you really do it? It's almost like we listen to what the world tells us instead of like just really listening to what feels right. Being authentic to yourself, knowing for me, I want to help people, not make their lives more difficult.
Mhm.
And that's what led to the change for me. I want to help people. I want to do interviews that change people's lives, that make them think differently
Mhm.
and encourage them. So it isn't too late. It's never too late.
Mhm.
And I feel like I'm a great example of that. A 30-year career in an industry that a lot of people strive to be in. And yet I said, I'm going to try something new. I'm going to go out there making zero money in the beginning, but I know that the content will be good and people will come.
Mm.
And being patient with that,
Mm.
knowing that it's not going to happen right away, but that you have to let your content speak for itself and let people share your news,
Mm.
because if it's good, they will.
Man, I love it. All right, it's time to share your podcast and all that. So promo time for you. Go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. So the Natalie Tysdal podcast, and it's under the Natalie Tysdal podcast on all podcast platforms. And I just hope that it is the encourager that I want it to be to so many people. We've already talked about its family, its health, its mindset. I just love interviewing people. I've been doing it for so long that I have contacts all over the world and experts all over the world on these different topics. I love ideas. I have a website, natalietysdal.com, and I blog on there about a lot of these topics with helpful tips as well. So for anyone who wants to share information, you can do so there. If you are an expert in something, I'd love to consider you for the podcast as well. So thanks for giving me the time to talk about my new podcast, you guys. I appreciate it.